Welcome everyone to our first session of the Inclusion in Apprenticeships Conference. The first session is actually going to be focusing on how organisations can be more inclusive, and our panel are going to be talking specifically about how organisations come out of the pandemic and change the way they operate and provide a more inclusive workspace for their workforce. Today, I'm joined by our chair of the BAME Apprentice Network, Cindy Rampasod, who was the former Senior Vice President for BTEC and Apprenticeships at Pearson. Give us a wave, Cindy. Also joined by Sharon Blyfield, Head of Early Careers at Coca-Cola Euro Pacific Partners. And last but certainly not least, Jeff Greenidge, Director for Diversity at the Education and Training Foundation and the Association of Colleges. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. There's such a wealth of knowledge on this panel, and I'm so happy and so proud to be joined by you guys. So I think let's get started. Let's kick it off. I'm going to go to Sharon first, as an employer, and being part of such a large organization, a global organization. What do you think the major challenges have been with inclusivity? I mean, you work in an organization that has offices all around the world, and I'm sure how you operate in the UK is probably different to around the world. But what have been the major challenges with inclusivity that you faced, during the pandemic?
Thanks, Kasim, for the question. Yes, a global organisation, and quite interestingly, we have a global conference from a HR perspective happening. And one of the things we've been sharing is how do we support inclusivity? And I think for me, it's been very much about how do you keep people still connected during the pandemic? So we were doing an awful lot of work before to try and ensure that we were an inclusive organisation. The pandemic hits, everyone then works remotely or in a totally different way. And how do you keep that connectivity? And we've had to be really intentional to do that. So setting up networks, making sure that everyone has accessibility, because I think that's really critical here, to the technology that allows them to still feel part of the organisation. And also equally as important, we've shared best practice from each country to say, what are you doing that can still help us to be inclusive? And I think the point for Coca-Cola Euro Pacific Partners was that we were already on this journey. All it meant is that we accelerated the journey and had more stakeholders become part of the conversation around inclusivity, so that it was coming not only from the top, but also from the bottom, and everyone is on that same journey. We haven't cracked it, let's be brutally honest. There is still a lot of work to do, but it's about the fact that the conversation is happening and we're making some real intentional moves, which I can talk about later.
One of the things I want to try and get out of this, what were your major challenges that you faced? I think when you look at diversity, when you look at inclusion, you think about the work. I like to look at this whole idea of working from home, and if you think about it, if you're from a BAME background, or you're from myself, I'll give my own example. Working from home, it was impossible because I lived in an extended family. We only have one sort of space in the house where someone can work from. My sister was working from home, so she was occupying that space. I was occupying my bedroom at times. How would that have impacted someone from maybe, my background to someone who, lives in a 3-bedroom house? There's only 2 of them living there. They've got plenty of space, and they can, husband and wife may be living in a 3-bed house. They've got an office, they've got a dining room, they've got plenty of space for both of them to be working there. How do you navigate those 2 members of staff that have got completely different home lives when you're trying to create an inclusive workplace in the home?
So it's a really good point. And I think when we moved initially to that home working for a lot of our main offices, we all still had that very much corporate mindset of we're now going live on screen. So You need to act and behave in the same way that you would have done in an office. And what became really clear and apparent very, very quickly was that scenario that you have just highlighted. So you may be in a 3-bedroom house, but there may well be young children running around, animals barking, people knocking at your door. And gradually, we always had to say, do you know what? It's acceptable. If somebody knocks at your door, or if you don't, and this is the really important one for me, if you don't want to put your camera on, because actually the environment that you're in, you don't feel comfortable doing that. We've got to a stage quite quickly where we were very accepting of that. Rather than mandating this is how it should be, there were no rules. You kind of almost tore up the rule book and said, yeah, it's about the outputs of our employees and our teams, as opposed to all of the other bits around them. But one thing we did do is that we reached out to people to focus on their well-being and what additional support we could do. And we also then looked at that group right at the beginning when we were thinking about the office reopening and giving them the option that if they wanted to work from the office, they could do that. And that worked really, really well for us. But I think the biggest thing was you don't have to have the camera on, because we absolutely recognize and accept that everybody's home environment is totally different. And we now, even as we come out of the pandemic and the offices are reopening and people have great access, we are still taking a lot of those principles to say it's absolutely fine. You know, and there's also a piece around, it's really daft, clothing. What do you wear on a video conference? You know, most people can see you from the chest upwards. And most people, I understand, were in slippers, maybe tracksuit pants, even shorts. But that became the norm. And actually, you turned it into more of a cultural change of it's absolutely fine and let's have a laugh about it, because we were still getting the outputs that we needed. And therefore, those who came from, you know, BAME communities, having extended families, or may actually be in a flat share where they only have their bedroom, it just became the norm and people became more accepting. But they had to do that very, very quickly.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sharon. Cindy, would you like to add anything to the question I asked to Sharon?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is I agree with everything Sharon has said. And I think one of the things about inclusivity and you know, what the pandemic did was, I think it made organizations think a lot more about empathy in leadership and empathy in culture. And really it's about understanding people as individuals and the whole person. And exactly what Sharon said is what's going on in people's lives, take an interest. It's not just about people turning up as robots in a corporate environment. It's about everything else that goes on in their lives. And all of a sudden, that was there for us all to see. So I think taking a real interest in people, showing real empathy, being really flexible, understanding different circumstances, and really allowing people to thrive in that environment. It's interesting with you, Sharon, that I'm different on the camera. I don't think we should ever mandate it. I agree with you on that. But one of the things that I thought the camera was really important for was to really see people and check on them. And my biggest concern was when people had the camera off all of the time. So, you know, and I think you have to work harder at keeping that connectivity going and understanding the kind of wellness and how people are doing. But, you know, it wasn't just BAME communities. It was, as you said, women with young children. It was the kind of flat share. It was actually, for some people as well, this just doesn't work well. The kind of isolation if you're more of an extrovert, for example. But I think what this period has done, in the period of reflection in COVID and as we come out of COVID, is it really raises a question around what does leadership of the future look like? And I would say at the heart is empathy, and at the heart is really understanding our employees and our colleagues as the rounded person, as the whole person, the kind of emotional, technical, whole human being, and that's really what true inclusivity is about.
Brilliant, fantastic, Cindy, and I echo your sort of comments there, and also from yourself, Sharon. This wasn't just about people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, but also young mothers, young families. I saw it in our own household, homeschooling and working at the same time. Within our own organisation, we had to put people on furlough because they couldn't work and look after their kids. You're expecting someone to do an 8-hour shift while parenting a child. And if you've got children between the ages of, 0 to 8, I'd say probably maybe up to 10, that is a challenge, and I think we can all agree that the respect for teachers during that period went very, very high, because it was a massive challenge. And I think how organizations, like I said, for our organization, we took the step that, look, we can't expect people to work during this time if they've got young children, and many requested to be put on furlough, which we had to do, because that was the right thing to do. That was supporting our employers, because what we were going to get out of having staff who were unhappy, overworked, and having issues at home, it just doesn't work. So you've got to understand each individual's sort of background, and I think that we've got to look at ways in which we come out of this pandemic now, as you said, Sharon, opening the doors of the office to people who really need it. The office space is a safe haven for a lot of people. Coming and having those water cooler chats or your coffee chats, you learn a lot about your team members, which you just don't get off a regular call on Zoom. And sometimes you're not comfortable talking on to a screen. So I think that's going to be important as we come out. Cindy, I can see you.
Yeah, I want to come back in
here.
because I think furlough is one solution. It's not the ideal. And actually, what I would say is, as we come out of COVID, it's going to be more about the flexibility. So it's not about you just showing up and being visible for 8 hours. It might be that your day is broken down slightly differently. It might be that how we measure productivity is slightly different, and how we measure turning up to work and impact is slightly different. And it's not the kind of 9 to 5 or the 8 hours a day in a block and the visibility. So I think also we're going to have to challenge ourselves around, what does a work day look like? What does a work week look like? For some industries, not for all industries. So it's just to say, because that's not going to be the solution longer term, where people need to be part of the workforce. And obviously we need talent, don't we, in our businesses and in our economy. So it's another thing to think about, I guess.
Definitely. I think flexible working, giving people the choice, the option, is going to be really vital to us coming out of this. There will be people who really enjoy working from home, because they've got that set up there. They enjoy the freedom and the ability to work how they want, and maybe are not looking forward to going back to the office. So I think there's a lot of things to consider here. I can see you smiling there, Sharon, because I know it's probably something you guys are thinking about now. Feel free to jump in and give us your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, Cindy's absolutely right. So, we put surveys out to our employees to understand from them what they were thinking about coming back into the office. How did they see their working pattern? And, the large proportion were very much, we will want to come back to the office. We won't want to come back 5 days a week. We've gotten used to, and anybody who commutes in London knows that, a 5-mile journey could take you more than an hour to get there. Have said Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are the ideal sorts of days. But more importantly, when they come to the office, is with an absolute intention. So there is part of the social connect, but not coming into an office to sit on conference calls or to just do your emails anymore. People have moved away from that. It has got to be real intention. If you're going to get people doing their commute, whether it be around the M25 or on public transport, what's my intent when I arrive at the office? And so we're now looking at the office as potentially more of a collaboration environment as opposed to an environment where you're just stuck on the PC all day, because the reality has shown you can do that anywhere. And Cindy, just on the point with the camera, what we did was very much in that group setting, it was, if you want it on, that's absolutely fine. When you're having that individual one-to-one, the higher expectation is that the camera will be on. Because also we have to remember, there is a little bit of invasion of privacy. So you're looking into someone's home. And, and I've been on a number of calls where people have said, oh, what's that in the background? And suddenly you're bringing your whole self to a call as opposed to what you want people to see.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is that in this pandemic we've got difficulties, but out of it has come a baseline of things for us to think about how we're going to work in the future. That's being able to bring your authentic self to the business. That's a huge asset in terms of inclusivity, and that those Zoom calls, those video calls, has in a sense allowed us to do that. And I like what you're saying there, Sharon, about intent, because often people say you go into work, but actually, what are you going to that building for? Is it for collaboration? Is it to do a particular project with someone who you can't necessarily do this project with virtually? Is it to meet your team? Is it to have that personal team conversation, those personal chats? So I think we've got a chance to redefine what work actually means as a result of this pandemic, and also a chance to define leadership. The fact that we see where leaders live, we see behind them, we see in their houses. That is that visible leadership. It is naturally visible. So leaders are being forced to, in a sense, become more human, to share some of their personal selves with them, with their staff. And I've noticed that within the companies I've been working with, where you've now got leaders, in a sense, coming out and making statements about their own personal life and sharing those with their staff. And so the pandemic has raised a number of challenges, but I think it's also provided us an opportunity to think differently about the culture of inclusivity that we want to create within organizations, because all those things we're talking about there, flexible working with intent, understanding each other's backgrounds, collaboration, listening to individuals instead of jumping in, etc. Having all those things that have come through this pandemic has been positives. So why wouldn't we build on those going forward? It's not easy, but there's an opportunity there for us to do that.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I can imagine it's hard enough working during this pandemic and working from home and everything else, but the impact it's had on apprentices has been massive. And I just want to sort of touch on that. I know Cindy did some sort of research about this and had a look into the impact of the pandemic on apprentices. And would you like to come in here, Cindy, and just maybe share a bit of the information you have on how it affects people?
I think it's kind of at a high level. I mean, we know that apprenticeships were key industries and key sectors, the travel and tourism, hospitality and catering. And many of those industries were ones that were really impacted hugely by COVID and were shut down for long periods. We also know that many of the people that work in those sectors tended to be women, young people, first career, first step on the ladder, and actually they were disproportionately disadvantaged in terms of income. I mean, what I would say about apprenticeships is that what I think the Institute did very quickly was looked at adaptations to make sure people could stay on programme, continue with their studies, so that actually, as we come out of the pandemic, people can return into the world of work. So I think that's been a real positive. But I think the real story of apprenticeships is obviously it took a real hit during the pandemic. In key industries took a real hit. And actually, young people, women, people from BAME backgrounds were disproportionately disadvantaged. Lower income individuals were disproportionately disadvantaged. So I think the real emphasis probably has got to be on how we get that kick-started and get the kind of re-engagement in those key sectors, and think about how we get people to re-enter. Because the other big thing is that you've got COVID, but you've also got Brexit, and Brexit is kind of masked the effect of Brexit by COVID. And we also know that the point on apprenticeships is the volumes went down, but many of those who were doing programs were not necessarily from the UK. They've returned to Europe, and we know that we've got massive gaps in workforce in those key sectors. So another thing is thinking about how you encourage talent to re-enter or to enter those sectors, and young people in particular. So I think it's an apprenticeship piece, but I also think it's a broader adaptations, it's a broader kind of careers advice and guidance piece, but it's also the fact that we've got a real skill shortage in some really, really important industries that apprenticeships were supporting. I mean, Jeff, you might want to come in here on anything else you heard at the Equalities Forum that we've both been sitting on.
Yes, thanks, Cindy, for that. I think we do know that COVID, Brexit, this perfect storm has really increased the disparities that were already there. You know, we've got disparities in terms of women's wages, black and minority ethnic recruitment, the recruitment of young people into particular roles, etc. So that, and clearly the intersection of those characteristics then, you know, absolutely explodes and expands the gaps. So we knew that that's there. I think what the major challenges coming through are really from a provider's perspective. What is the role of the provider in, as you say, encouraging individuals, supporting employers into making those apprenticeships something which are attractive for students, for young people, and also something which has a certain longevity. It's not a short-term piece, you know, it's a starting on a career path, which may not be a linear career path, but it's the starting of a path. So there's a role for providers there. There's also clearly a role for employers, and perhaps providers with employers, in helping them to shape what that apprenticeship really looks like, to ensure that it's appropriate for the individuals. You're right, there's a role for advice and guidance there, and there's something definitely about advice and guidance being a bit more challenging and raising expectations of young people to go into, and almost demystifying sometimes some of these particular opportunities. So they can sometimes seem difficult, or they can sometimes be stereotyped. So what's the role for advice and guidance going forward? We need to think about that. And also, I think there's a role for the individual. Do we empower individuals enough to make choices, or are we still in a very sort of pre-pandemic mode of telling, as opposed to asking, coaching, and supporting? So I think those are my four real thoughts going forward. That it's about identifying the role of the provider, the role of the employer working with the provider. Advice and guidance is absolutely key, and there's something about the pedagogy and the methodology we use with young peoples which could help them become much more empowered.
So can I come in?
Yeah,
that's okay. So the apprenticeships is a really interesting one for me. So we paused on apprenticeships, but in actual fact, our intake is higher than had we not paused. But when I look at a lot of the work that we did about females in STEM, because we haven't been able to do the outreach as we previously had, and talking to others in my food and drink network, we seem to have regressed. We seem to have gone backwards in terms of the attraction piece. And I think that's one thing that the pandemic has disadvantaged us with, is that those connections that you thought were strong may not have been necessarily as strong. But there's also that whole discussion on, grades being inflated, and therefore young students staying on in academia rather than coming into their apprenticeships. So I think that there is a piece of work now going back to say apprenticeships are here. We have a skills shortage. So actually now is the time for you to be coming out for that individual and also for those educators to say now's actually a perfect time to be coming into an apprenticeship because companies are crying out for that young early talent as well.
I mean, if I can just come back in on that, I agree with you. And I think now is absolutely the moment to really challenge that prejudice and kind of, and it's deep prejudice about different pathways in life and who takes a different pathway. And if you do an apprenticeship or you do something that's technical, that somehow you are disadvantaged, you're less able. And so what we need to do is really see these different pathways as equal, adding equal value. They're just different. You know, we're talking about inclusivity and difference, aren't we? And they are just different. And I think it's interesting, the new Secretary of State talked about the power of apprenticeships and the fact that a family and a parent should be as proud of their young person taking up an apprenticeship as them going to read classics at Oxford. And so, again, I think I'll come back to the media, careers advice and guidance, role models, creating the aspirations, and actually showing that apprenticeships can do this. There are some amazing apprenticeship programs. I mean, Sharon, your organisation runs many of them. So I think it's breaking down that prejudice and showing that it is about aspiration and ambition and creating opportunity in the same way as academia does.
And interesting on that point, Cindy. So I had an apprentice who joined our business in 2019. Very bright, very intelligent young lady. Her brother has just joined us as a graduate. Yet he is looking now to his sister to understand the culture, to understand the business. He's the one that went to university. She came in to the work environment, yet the graduate is looking to the apprentice for the knowledge. And that shows the power of apprenticeships.
But
thank you all so much on that point. Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing, Jeff, and then we'll come back to you. You know, you make this very important point about IAG, and you know, we've all just talked about the importance of apprenticeships. And actually, you know, why are we not seeing apprenticeships on par with degrees? Why are we not looking at vocational study as something that is just as acceptable as going to university? And I think, you know, for 6 years, we've been challenging this narrative. You know, we started off with the Asian Apprenticeship Awards. And I'm going to tell you a story now. And it's one of my favorite stories that has come out of the work we have done. There was a young girl and her parents said, you must become a doctor. And she's a very bright girl. And this is one of the things that really frustrates me when people talk about apprenticeships, because they perceive people that do apprenticeships as not being bright or not being academic. This young girl, straight A star student, got into Birmingham University to do medicine. She did not want to do medicine. Medicine was not for her. But her parents and her family insisted, you know, this is the right path for you. It's a respectable job. You're going to go to university, you're going to get a degree, and you're going to become a doctor. Okay, that's it. That's what you're going to do. But actually, this is a bright young individual. Now, the reality is that she left her medical degree and started working as a receptionist in an accountancy firm. And it was in that accountancy firm that the senior partner realized that there's some real talent in this young lady and encouraged her to go and look at an apprenticeship. She's now qualified as a chartered accountant with EY. And I remember standing next to her father at the Apprenticeship Awards and looking at him and saying, now, what do you think? And he looked at me and he said, son, I got it wrong. And this is what we need to challenge. And these are the things we need to challenge. Apprenticeships are not any less than a degree. We need to challenge the narrative. Apprenticeships are important. Apprenticeships deliver, and apprenticeships provide a bright future. And Sharon, just on your point, that young girl whose brother is now trying to find his feet, and this is not putting universities down, but university is about studying the theory, and apprenticeship gives you the theory and the knowledge together. And I think, and the experience, which you don't necessarily get at university. So of course he's going to come in on the back foot. Yes, he's got all the knowledge. Yes, he's probably got all the theory, but you can't put a value on experience. So I think we need to keep banging the drum and creating that level playing field and that inclusivity piece around graduates and apprentices, and making sure that they're both treated as equals.
Kasim, I also think what we need to be doing is creating the role models. So both you and Sharon have given examples of amazing role models. So the more those role models are seen, the more they start to advocate for their journey. It'll encourage others. I think the one area that I think we still need to challenge ourselves on quite considerably on apprenticeships and some of those kind of better programs, for want of a better phrase, is making sure that the access is also there for girls and also for people from lower demographic income backgrounds, but also BAME backgrounds. So we know, we had somebody from one of the major airports give evidence at our Equalities Forum. He talked about 35 women being recruited on their STEM program. There was no diversity there. They were all white young women. So I think we still have to work hard at the kind of outreach, and that's partly maybe culturally in the families, but it's also us creating those networks and those pipelines and understanding how we can get to those talent and creating the role models. So I think so that those opportunities that are there on apprenticeships are there for all, and it's not just the kind of lower levels. So that's one concern I have, and I think we need to work harder on that.
I think you'll find on Thursday night, Cindy, there's going to be a lot of young ladies that you're going to be looking at and thinking, wow, so we are working on that and we're striving for that. And like I said, just the example that I've given and Sharon's given, these are young ladies that are out there. And it's interesting because I'm seeing more young ladies out there than I am seeing young men. And it's making me think, why are the boys not getting through, and we always talk about this, in the education sector, that, girls are always brighter than boys, and they always excel better academically. And it's interesting because I'm now starting to see that through all the applications we get for the awards. And I'm seeing they're putting themselves out there more, they're striving, they're doing a lot more work. And it's fantastic to see. So I agree, we need to do more, and we need more support from employers for the network to try and increase how many people are actually being seen. We've got, I think, 25 videos we've put out this year from our finalist apprentices, and some of their journeys are just phenomenal, and the things that they're achieving at the ages that they are. But one of the most interesting things I've found over the past 3 years is just how many women are coming out of being a full-time mum and the apprenticeship being that opportunity to get back into work and actually launch, catapult their careers. I'm looking at, full-time mums who are doing, management apprenticeships, and they've been out of work for maybe 10, 15 years, but they've had that skill set, and the apprenticeship is actually bringing them back in, and they're out there, and they're doing just as well as the younger generation are. So I think apprenticeships don't just deliver for young people, but they deliver across the sector. And I think that is the key inclusivity point about apprenticeships, just how inclusive they are. Jeff, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just one thing on that. I think the Alliance does amazing work, and the BAME Apprenticeship Awards at really showcasing talent and creating role models. I guess my point is more about mainstream and mainstream media, mainstream education, that we need to see it apart from just what we're doing in the awards. Because just what we're doing on the awards is not going to change it. It needs to become much, much broader to have the reach and the impact. That was the kind of point I was trying to make.
No, definitely. And I think, we've seen it with sort of death of a young girl in a park in London, and sort of the media traction that got. Why are our voices not being heard? Why are we not being put on those platforms? And I think that's part of a wider discussion, probably, in terms of the media, which is what are they doing in terms of promoting BAME talent? Not a lot. So I think that's a separate conversation that probably we need to have and need to work on. And I hope, organizations, I am seeing employers do better at it. I am seeing them put their BAME talent first, which is fantastic. But as you said, more needs to be done, and and we need to challenge this. Jeff, I want to come to you, good self, because I know you've been waiting patiently to come in on this.
Apologies, I'm got a lot of noise behind me. I'm sorry about that. There's something, I think, what we can do as well. Don't forget, the reason why universities are so prominent is that we've spent probably 20 years promoting universities, and that's why we've got to this particular place. It starts with our language. We often use the word bright and academic in the same sentence. Why wouldn't we use the word bright and apprenticeship in the same sentence? When we talk about graduates, we think natural universities. Why wouldn't we think graduates from apprenticeships? It's something that we can do to take control of our language when we speak about these things. We have apprenticeships at level 5, so why wouldn't we want to have people graduating from our apprenticeship? So there's something about our language. There's something about demystifying apprenticeships so that they become the norm. And then that again is in the gift of providers and in their conversations with parents and in their conversations with the young people in advice and guidance. It's those are things that we can actually control. And I think Cindy, you've hinted at it there. The third thing we can control is the stories about these journeys. How do we market? How do we promote this? Are we going to have a campaign that, like the university campaign, that lasts 5 years, where we constantly bang on about the value of someone going to do an apprenticeship where they're earning money, they're gaining skills, and they're actually in a job that's there for a long time? So I think the focus campaign again, targeted at parents, targeted at young people, with clear messages about the equivalence of apprenticeships, that should work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think this whole education piece about IAG, this information, advice, and guidance. Where does it start? And I believe it needs to start in the schools. And what was really shocking about the applications we received for the awards this year was just how many people said, well, we didn't know what an apprenticeship was. We just came about, we did some research, or, someone told me to have a look at it, and, I did my own research. Why are we not seeing schools and colleges talking about apprenticeships? That's where the issue lies. It lies from right when you're starting your education at school, you're not being told about apprenticeships. The only thing you're talking about is graduating. What's the next step? What's the next step of education? And apprenticeships does not come in that conversation. And what we need to understand is, how do we get apprenticeships in that conversation?
I think firstly it starts with initial teacher education. If you think of the route of most teachers, they come through the university route. If we were to start with initial teacher education and have those things within those programs, which says that yes, you have got an academic pathway which leads to A-levels, which leads to university, and we've also got a pathway that leads to A-levels and also leads to an apprenticeship. That sort of thing done at initial teacher education is probably the first step in my view.
I mean, I also think with teachers and careers advice and guidance, we measure the wrong, well, in my opinion, we measure outcomes in terms of performance tables. And so there's a real pressure on teachers around performance tables and progression, which is, A-level degrees, for example. I mean, although we forget 53% of young people go on to vocational programs and apprenticeships. So many young people go on to these programs. I think it's about how do we get the kind of traction where they see what the opportunities might be in many industries. I think apprenticeships as well, generally, you know, I think when we talk about apprenticeships for 16 to 18, as somebody who spent years working in industry before I came into education 10 years ago, it's a big ask getting a 16 to 18-year-old in an organization. We're an SME economy. There are some real dynamics here. So Coca-Cola and big organizations can have an apprenticeship recruitment graduate program. It's much harder for SMEs. So I also think it's about the pathway that we create for 16 to 18-year-olds so that they can then go on to an apprenticeship. So they do their vocational studies and then they're kind of a route to apprenticeships or a journey to apprenticeships. I think it's a big ask at 16 to 18. So I think some of that also needs to be taken into account. But I kind of do want the conversation to reflect that lots of young people are looking at this other path. But I think there is something about teachers, like you said, Jeff, the training, but also are they measured on the right things, you know, performance tables.
And I think from you know, organizations and industry have a massive role to play within this, because if we are not highlighting and supporting those career advisors within you know, further education in schools, then, you know, they will think, well, employers don't want an apprentice. So it's being really intentional in terms of, as an organization, what's your strategy in that early career space to promote the opportunities? Because we absolutely believe that there is a blend. So going to university might be right for some people, but I think it was the point Jeff made, you might be bright, but going to university is not going to get the best out of you. And therefore there is a different pathway for you to be absolutely, you know, to absolutely go down. And for us, we work quite heavily with the Careers and Enterprise company to really talk about how can we support and promote within schools, and, you know, and how can we have advisors who will kind of give that non-academic lens to you know, schools, colleges, etc., so that the young people that we want to bring into our business are actually hearing it from industry, and then being in a more informed position to challenge their educators to say, well, such and such from Coca-Cola came in and they talked about X, Y, and Z, and they brought along some of their, you know, apprentices who went through a program. And actually, I want to find out more about that. So help me to find out more about that. I remember being at one career show just a few years ago, and I said to the students, where are your teachers who are supposed to be with you? I said, go and challenge them. Say, here's a career pathway document that Coke had given to us. I want to find out more. Go and challenge your teachers. They may not like it, but go and challenge them. And just one last point, you know, Jeff, you talked about apprentices and the language of graduating. The thing that we do annually is we have our apprenticeship graduation, and we invite the parents and we invite the family along so that they can experience that very proud moment. They're in their caps, they're in their gowns, because for us, you know, as a business, we've been really intentional in terms of what's the direction of travel that we're going to.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much to all three of you for, you know, what has been an amazing discussion. I just, you know, I wish we had more time to just keep talking, because there's a lot for us to say on all these different topics. But I just want to sort of summarize everything that we've discussed today. And I'm going to ask each of you to cover one topic. So Sharon, I'm going to ask you to just give us, you know, your sort of fire round of 3 key points for inclusivity in recruitment.
So, oh gosh, really interesting. For inclusivity in recruitment, for us at Coca-Cola, we actually use our equity group. So it's a group of Black and Asian employees who are part of the recruitment process to be able to be reflective in that process. So it's really important to utilize the staff that you have to really support your journey. And I think the other thing for me, very quickly, is don't be afraid as an organization to say, we don't know where to start. Go and look and talk to other organizations who are on that same journey and get that best practice. If you do that in recruitment, you should start to be able to feel and act more inclusive.
I love that point, Sharon, because I always get organizations who come to me a bit scared to say, we're not there yet. We don't do anything. And I'm like, it's fine. You're doing something. You're speaking to me. That is, you're opening the conversation. As they say, admitting your own faults is the first step to correcting them. And actually, organizations that recognize they need to do something are already on the right path. So don't be discouraged if you're looking at your organization saying, we haven't got any diversity. What do we do? Are we going to look bad if we just start a program? No, get started, get going, do it. No one is going to judge you. Cindy, I'm going to come over to you. Quick fire round, representation.
So representation, I think representation is about understanding your customer base, and so making sure your business is successful and that your employees reflect that, and that your employees reflect the markets that you operate in. So just thinking about global, regional differentials, and you get representation, I think, by reaching out, by putting the feelers out, the organizations, the connectivity, by using the people within your own organization as well. And what I would say about representation, it's stating the very obvious, but it's so crucial. It's kind of the right thing, but it's so crucial for organizations to be truly successful. You've got to be representative of those that you serve as a makeup. And actually, the other thing I'd say on this very quickly is make representation part of your success matrix for your leaders and people throughout your organization, because it matters.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And we always use this term, you can't be what you can't see. And this goes across the whole of the conversation today around inclusivity, whether it's recruitment, whether it's leadership, whether it's representation. If I can't see someone that looks like me in an organization, am I going to feel like I belong to that organization? And one of our judges in the previous year is a lady called Monique, who runs New Gen Accountants. She said to me, I went to a careers fair and I saw a black gentleman at a PwC stand, and I didn't know a black person could be an accountant at that time. Now, me saying this in this day and age probably is surreal to people watching this today, but these are her own words, that it was only because she saw another black male who was working at a top 4 accountancy firm that she thought, I can do this too. So this is why representation really matters. And for those organizations who are thinking, we're not attracting BAME talent, well, you need to look what's happening already within your organization and how you're going to, attract that talent. And that leads me perfectly on to the final topic, which is leadership. Jeff, if you can share your wisdom with us in a summary of what we can do to be better leaders in an inclusive organization.
I think the first thing we do is learn the lessons of COVID. COVID is bad, but we had some good lessons in that, in terms of how leaders responded very quickly, created those environments for staff to work in and work themselves. So let's learn those lessons. I think there's also something about rethinking roles. It's an opportunity for leaders to rethink ways of working and therefore rethinking roles. Government leaders rethinking roles around the role of the employer and the role of the provider in terms of apprenticeships and workplace learning. The role of advice and guidance clearly needs to be rethought in using employers more as support agents for advice and guidance practitioners. So I think there's something about rethinking roles. And I suppose the third aspect coming through from the pandemic and coming through from George Floyd, Sarah Everard, all that is leaders thinking much more about their mindsets. We've spent an awful lot of time getting MBA qualifications and working in a very, very structured way. What the pandemic and what those incidents have showed us, that when emotion kicks in, action happens. So let's maintain that emotion for a long period of time. Don't just leave it for Sarah Everard's murder or for George Floyd's murder. Let's have that emotion running all throughout our leadership work. That's the empathy that Cindy was talking about there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thank you again to all three of you for joining me. Such a wealth of knowledge on this panel, and hope we can do this again, maybe in person, on a stage, on a platform where, you know, we've got a crowd in front of us cheering us on. So thank you so much, and look forward to the next session today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kasim.
Thanks, Kasim. Love you. Bye now. Bye.